Hi, I'm Julie from Silver Birch Studio, and I'm here today because I've had a lot of requests for a demo of the new Watercolor Magic brushes that I have available on Etsy. So I thought I'd do a little walkthrough for you today and just show you off the 36 brushes and a little bit about how to use them. It's not a tutorial, it's really just a demonstration, but there will be tutorials coming, so stay tuned for those for sure in the future. So we'll start out with the top of the list here. They're all grouped together: brushes, and then blenders, and then some extras. So we're going to go take them one by one and go right through them. We're starting with the DuoColor Rough Blooms. And the way DuoColor brushes work is they use two colors and blend them together. And I've provided you a number of palettes to kind of get you started with this. They work in pairs. So the idea is that you select one and then the other. I've got them selected up here now. I'm going to demo with this pair here. And generally speaking, you want to start out with the dark color selected as your selected color up here. And I'll show you why in a minute when I demo the brush. These are all just suggestions. You can certainly play. There are an infinite number of color variations that you can come up with. But these will get you started, so it's kind of a help that way. We're going to start out. When you apply gentle pressure, you get the darker color, that primary color, that first color that we suggested. And then as you press harder, you're going to get that secondary color, the pinker color. And they really blend together beautifully. This brush also has what I call a bloom texture to it, the way you get with watercolor. And there's a dark edge around this one. It's got quite a rough dark edge, so hence the name. I initially thought about calling my brushes fun names like Marshmallow and Fred and Edgar and Sarah, but instead I went with the logical names that kind of explain exactly what they do. Now these brushes lay down color in quite a transparent way, the way real watercolor does. So you can see you'll get that layering effect, which is really pretty. Now the next brush down is the Rough Blooms brush. And it does the same thing, same texture, but it does it with the single color. So in this one, you'll only see that single shade, but you'll still get the texture and the rough edge and so on. And the next brushes are the rough. Now these have the rough texture, but they don't have the blooms. There's just a slight watercolor texture with these. Starting out, I'm pressing harder, coming down. Again, very pressure sensitive, all the brushes are. So you control it with just the pressure on your Apple Pencil. And you can see that very similar brush on the edges, but there's a lot less texture on the inside with this one. And similarly, the regular rough brush, same thing. Similar outer texture with that rough edge, pressure sensitive, and less texture on the inside. All right. Now the next ones up are the regular blooms. These are going to have a little bit less texture on the edge. Let's get it up to a size that works here, around 50. So you can see that that has a much softer edge to it, but there's still some texture there. And the regular, again, is the same texture at the edge, the same bloom texture on the inside. But just a single shade. All right, and then of course, you probably guessed how this is going to work with all these. I like to give you options. So here's the regular brush texture in the DuoColor. But without the blooms on the inside, just a very subtle watercolor texture on this one. And then the regular version, which is the single shade. And then forging right ahead. Here we have what I call the smooth blooms. Now these have a very smooth edge. This one's more for the control freaks out there. And you can see you get a really smooth, controlled edge on this one. You still get the bloom texture on the inside. And of course we have the single color version as well. And I'll zoom in just to show you. There is a darker edge on this, the way you get with watercolor. It's just not as prominent as it was on some of the other brushes that I've shown you. All right. And then of course we have the regular smooth version. Here's the smooth version without the bloom texture on the inside. And then a single color version. Now this next brush I call the bleeding edge blooms, and I'll show you why in a second. There's definitely an edge to this that kind of has a bleeding edge texture. You know, the way watercolor will bleed into the paper. Well, this brush emulates that, or at least that's the plan. Let me zoom in so that you can see it a little bit better. You can see how it has that kind of bleed look to the edge. One of the things we love about real watercolor, so I tried to replicate it here for you. And of course we have a single color version of the same. And then of course there is the less internal texture version. Again, similar brush, just with less variation on the inside of it. Still with the pressure sensitivity, of course. All of these brushes are like that. Single color version. Okay, the next set of brushes that are up are the outline blooms. Now these have the bleeding edge, but there's more of a dark edge outline on them. So let's launch right into those. Here's the DuoColor version. And the single color version. I'll zoom in here so that you can see. So there's definitely a dark edge around this in addition to the bleeding edge. That makes it kind of a fun brush. All right. And next up, of course, we have one with less texture. So here's the bleeding outline brush. Without the blooms. And the single version, single color version. Now the next brush, I have to tell you, this one is especially for my friend Cassandra Riley, who is a big fan of the soft wash kind of brush. So I'm going to show you this one. Just lays down a really soft wash of color, and then you can layer it to get deeper tones. You can see each time you lay down some more color, you get a darker shade. So you can get some really pretty gradients this way. That makes it really fun to use, I think, and to lay down. You can even use different colors to blend too. Now the next one is another variation on the soft wash. This one has a bit of an edge to it, a bit of that bleeding edge, like I showed you before. So a bit more texture, but still goes on that really soft wash kind of way. And layers beautifully. Let me get one more layer down here, and then I'll zoom in to show you the texture. So there you can see you just get a little, it's softer than in the bleeding edge brushes because it's a soft wash brush, but you still get that nice texture. Whereas the other one is just pure softness. This is the one that I would have called marshmallow. All right, and wait, there's more. So our next brushes give us a little more texture, Splotchy. And there's both a DuoColor version and a single color version, of course, so that we have options. And this is a way to lay down some color that has a lot of texture to it. Let me zoom in. It's a really nice way to do like the center of a flower or anywhere that you want more texture. It's a bit more like you've stippled the brush down repeatedly. That's kind of more what the texture is like on this one. And of course we have a single color version as well. Does the same thing but without the color variation. These brushes are also pressure sensitive, by the way, just like all the brushes here. Okay, so next up we have the blender brushes. The water blender works as either a brush or under the smudge tool, your choice. And it's basically just like adding water and smooshing pigment around. So you can see you can get a really nice effect with this one. I'll show you as a blender brush. I'll show you on full strength. A lot of the blender brushes I use on a reduced opacity, but I'll show it full strength just to show you what it will do. You can see it has very much the same effect as it did when it was used as a brush itself. Next up we have the super soft blender, and this one is exactly as described. It just gives you this really, really soft effect. Kind of for perfect gradients, this one is the one to go with. It sort of makes things, especially if you're using it to kind of smudge out a mistake or something, sort of erases it like it never even happened. And I wish I had something like that for real life because it would come in really handy. All right, we still have more blenders to show you, so let's go into the brushy blenders. These are really fun because they mix the pigment in a very different way than a lot of other blender brushes. So the brushy blenders, which by the way also work as a paintbrush as well, but for blending, they work by pulling pigment from one side to the other. And you get this kind of brushy effect, like you've dragged a dry brush through the pigment. And like most of the blending brushes or any smudge tool that you use, they work by pulling pigment from where you start to where you end. So if you pull it back the other way, you'll mix it in the opposite effect. Just to show you really quickly the brushy blender as a brush, because it also works well that way. You can see that you can get some really nice effects just laying pigment down. This is a really nice way to add some detail to a flower petal, or you probably use it for fur on an animal, something like that. All right, and then there's a soft version of the brushy blender. And this has similar effect, but just much softer edges to it. Whereas the other one has quite bristly, this one's a bit more muted and soft. And it also works as a brush. I'll show you that quickly. And you can see it's much softer in the way it lays down the pigment or blends things than the brushy blender. So that gives you two options on the brushy blenders. Let's move on to the fluffy blenders. Now, the fluffy blenders are some of my favorites. And I like it so much that I've provided you two different sizes. The Fluffy Blender Small will do a nice job on smaller areas or fine detailing smudging. And then the larger one, just larger size, same brush, larger size, just to give you more options for doing a larger area. Okay, so we're still not done because there's extra brushes. So the extra brushes, so first up is the tight spray, and this one kind of gives little dabs of paint in a fairly tight controlled spray. Let me zoom in so that you can see the texture a little bit better. And these are very randomized, so every time you lay it down, it'll give you a different pattern, which is nice. So doesn't have that digital, just pure stamp effect. Then the next one is the Loose Splatters brush. And this one has larger paint splatters that are a bit more spread out. And this one's extremely random, so it's like real watercolor. You never know what you're going to get when you lay it down. But it's kind of a fun one to use if you want something a bit more dramatic. You can use it at a smaller size too to get something a little bit less dramatic. So those give you two fun options there for adding splatter. Next one up is the background and blooms brushes. So let's go in and do those. Number one first. And these are a great way to add down a background. And the longer you press on it, the lighter it will get, and the more it'll pull in that second shade. So when you first lay it down, it'll give you this really dark splotch, but then as you move around, it'll smooth it out. And then let's look at number two. Number two has a slightly different texture. Let me back out of this one. All right, this is number two. It's got kind of a softer, streakier edge. Again, fun way to add down a large swath of pigment. Back out of that one so that I can show you blooms number three, which just has a slightly different texture. You'll get slightly different effects. Now the other way that you can use these that's really fun, let me lay down something that we can work on. Let's use the pinker shade. And how about some soft wash? Let's lay down a few layers of soft wash here. Okay, that gives us something good to work with. Now you're going to take that, you're going to add a layer on top of it, do a clipping mask, and then set your blend mode to either multiply, or some of the other ones will work too, but I'll show you on multiply. So now we'll go back to the brushes and we'll grab the background and blooms brush. We'll use number 1. You can use the same shade or you can use a darker shade. Maybe we'll go with the darker one just for more drama. And then, as you can see, you can lay down and just get these wonderful kind of natural looking watercolor variation effects. You can get some hard edges, or if you run the brush over it some more, you'll get some soft edges. You can get some really cool effects this way, especially if you use the less textured brushes. Rather than the blooms brush, use the regular brushes and then add your own blooms in afterward like that. So that is a fun technique to use. And then the very last brush to show you is the textured sketcher. The textured sketcher brush is just something I provided because I know a lot of people like to add a sketch before they start working, or they want something that's visible. Afterwards. So either way, the nice thing about this brush is it gives you a little bit of texture, but not too much. And it can also be good for doing like a stem or a tree trunk or something like that. So you can even use it to fill in an area where you want some texture, but something a bit more heavily pigmented than the watercolor itself. So there you go. That is the whole collection. You've seen them all. Feel free to like and subscribe. I do intend to do some more videos that will be more tutorials rather than just showing the brushes off. So those should be coming out soon. Thank you so much and have a wonderful day.